its country in huge debt? Is it okay for a government to make decisions that can decrease the long-term happiness of the population? We here at Team Proposition do not believe that that's okay, and that's why we're so proud to propose the motion. This House believes that the national central banks should set limits on governmental spending. Through this debate, we want to prove the specific harms that boundary-less governmental spending has on a country and on a population, and why this particular motion would actually work. So how do we believe that this motion would be implemented? We believe that each individual bank in the Western liberal democracies should tailor suit and act on how much financial deficit and debt a country is allowed to have, or a government is allowed to make. As we've seen the EU has done in the EU Fiscal Policy Compact, where the countries who are part of this compact is allowed to have a maximum budget deficit on 3% of their GNP and a maximum debt on 60% of their GNP. And if they don't do this, they have to pay a fine. So the basic idea is that the central bank should hold the governments responsible for breaking the rules. This could be by, for example, implementing sanctions on the government if the contract is broken. In cases like the countries in the EU where a fiscal policy compact is already existing, we believe that the consequences for breaking the rules should be more severe. And this could, for example, like that it shouldn't be something that the countries could just pay their way out of, and that it could, for example, be exclusion from certain parts of the EU. Within these tailored limits, the government can use the money on almost whatever it wants. However, we believe that the central bank should approve big fiscal policy packages and laws. So, to my constructive matter, we have 3 points for you today. The first one is why it's okay to limit governmental autonomy. Second one, why the central bank's control is effective. And thirdly, why this would create better policies. Before I move into my first constructive point, I want to talk shortly about the status quo. No, thank you. We are in a situation where the countries spend more money than they've got. Even superpowers like the US and Europe have huge budget deficits and are basically living beyond their means. Take, for example, Greece, who is right now having a debt on about 140% of their GNP. Another example is that since September 2012, the national debt of the US has increased with an average of $2.43 billion per day. This is obviously a huge amount. Last example is just that we see over and over again how governments use loads of money on Olympic Games or championships, even though their country is in crisis. This proves that this is not something new. We've seen how governments act financially irresponsible and for several years, and we here at Team Proposition believe that that's a problem, and we believe that we have the solution to it. So on to my first constructive point, why it's okay to limit governmental autonomy. First of all, I want to establish that we do recognize that governmental autonomy is very important. Why is that? It is because it is an extension of democracy, because we like to shape our own lives, and therefore we choose the governments on the grounds of what kind of policies we wish for our country. If the government doesn't have the freedom to implement the policies they like, that undermines the idea of democracy. We recognize this. However, we do believe that in some cases it is okay to limit governmental autonomy and leave important decisions to be made by more qualified people. Basically because we believe that it's okay to limit governmental autonomy once the alternative is that it will have tangible and severe harms to society and to the people in society. We see how this is actually already being done because the central banks in most Western countries are in control of the monetary policy in the countries, taking care of the interest rates and the inflation. Because they simply know or are more capable and more qualified to make the right solution for the country and implement the right, or do the right thing. So because we believe that at this point the politicians are actually harming society by using more money than they have got, it is okay to limit governmental spending. So why is unlimited governmental spending harmful to society? If we take a country like Greece, what happens in a situation like that, like they are in? That's what I'm going to explain to you now. So when a government spending is too high, the government has to finance their spending in some way. They would do this through loans normally. So the countries lending money to Greece would actually would need a pretty high interest rate because there is a high risk in lending money to a country like Greece. So when the interest rate goes up, that means that Greece in the long run has to pay more money back to the foreign countries, which leads to them accumulating more debt in the long run. And in the long run, Greece would become even poorer, which would harm the standards of living of the population. So when Greece accumulates debt, the interest rate becomes high. I've just proven this. That would also lead to a second mechanism that I'm going to show you now. So when the interest rate becomes high, then people want to have their money in the bank because they would make money out of having them in the bank rather than spending it. Then they would get more money out in the long run. This obviously means that they wouldn't spend it, that they wouldn't consume, that they would consume less. So when people consume less, that is bad for the economy. So why is it bad for the economy? When people consume less, then production goes down. People get fired, and the government spending increases even more, which leads to more debt, and more people being unhappy because they don't have a job and don't have any money. So all these mechanisms happen when politicians, because politicians' policies are short-term and short-sighted, and therefore they don't think of the long-term harms this could be prevented if the central bank was in control of the economy or was able to make limits on the governmental spendings. So now we've proven to you why it has multiple tangible harms to society when the government has 100% autonomy on the fiscal policy, and because of all these harms, it's okay for the central bank to regulate just a bit. I'll now move on to telling you what the central bank could do. So the second point, why the central bank's control is actually effective. So firstly, the central bank has long-term goals and isn't short-sighted. So that, in comparison to politicians who are short-sighted. Because a politician's main goal will always be to be re-elected. Therefore, he wants to make the voters happy by, for instance, giving them more money, because then people will re-elect him. This leads to very short-term goals and decisions, because he's constantly keeping in mind that he wants to win the next election. And therefore, it's easy the people working for the central bank, however, do not have to think about getting re-elected, and therefore, it's easier for them to make the hard, non-popular decisions when needed, as for example, decreasing the governmental spending. Yes, please.
If politicians only think about the short term, then how can you explain to me that David Cameron's latest point in case and his own whole political policy is based on decreasing government debt, as he said that it is the biggest threat to our society in 21st century?
Well, we believe that there are cases where politicians do think about the long term, but mainly we believe that politicians think about the short term because they want to be re-elected, because then if they don't get re-elected, then they will lose their job. So we believe that in most cases, politicians are short-termed. Nextly, furthermore, we believe that politicians understand politics and not economics. The ones making the most important decisions for our economy should be economists who know about economy, and we believe that are the ones in the central bank. Lastly, we say that the central bank should work with the government to prevent the catastrophes and financial crisis and not just be a lender in last resort once the crisis is already there. And for all these reasons, I'm so proud to propose. Thank you.